Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our April spring version of our resource group. Thank you for Alex from ABS for being here with us today. As always, if everybody would enter your information into the chat, especially contributors, who you are, what you do, why people would reach out to you and how. And guests, if we have some guests join us, please enter information if you'd like, and we will take questions as we go. I do like to talk about what we have coming up and our format for the day. We have a lot of stuff coming up. We've just come through quite a few things, but yesterday, podcast 008 released. So if you're not in touch with our podcast world, you might want to jump on board. This one, we're talking about building your business plan. And this one was about ownership and organizational structure. And it was Mary Bretman, Beverage Business Builders, Jeff O'Brien from Chestnut Cambronne, and Jeff Mindell from Left Hand. And the next podcast is going to be 009 is going to release April 25th. And that's kitchen plus tap rooms, brew pubs, or packaging breweries. So kind of those big questions. And those are going to be handled by Tom Hennessy from Colorado Boy, Chris Black from the Falling Rock Tap House, and Matt Potts from Distill Restaurant and Brewworks. So that's our podcast world. We really appreciate All About Beer for working with us and partnering with us to make those happen. Next month, we have our resource group on May 24th, so a little bit late in the month, and that's going to be Kerry Shumway. He is craft beer financial training, and he's also beer business finance. So that'll be a good financial spot to kind of pivot to after we talk about equipment. And our podcasts, both yesterday's and the one coming up and next month's resource group, are all sponsored by Arrived. So much appreciation for Arrived for stepping up in a big way for us and supporting. We also have our second quarter educational webinar coming up. We do those quarterly. This one's going to be with Charlie Gottenkinney from Brews Beers, and he's going to talk about developing a sales territory plan. That's going to be on May 17th, and that's in partnership with Craft Beer Professionals. And also with Craft Beer Professionals, we just recorded for the spring conference a QA/QC panel discussing how do I know if I'm making good beer. And that was with Neil Whitty from Craft Quality Solutions, Mel Antone Tim, who's a sensory specialist, Lindsay Barr from Draft Lab, John Hughes from UC Davis, and Eric Fowler with White Labs. So all that stuff is awesome, and I hope to see a lot of those people and as many of you as we can at CBC. We will have our lounge in Nashville up on the third floor by the expo just outside the door. And when you're ready to sit down or charge up your electronics, we've got that covered for you. So come by anytime that you can. Our format today, we're going to just cover the events. I'll talk about our mission statement briefly, and then we're going to do our contributor spotlight with Alex. He's open to taking questions as we go. And then once we kind of move through that interview style process, we are absolutely open to take other questions as well. We've got other contributors online, so we can take the conversation wherever it goes. Briefly, our mission, why we're here. The mission of Startup Brewery is to raise the bar for startups and growing breweries through education, and at the same time, simultaneously lowering the barrier to entry for those looking to live their dream. So education is number one, looking to make a lot of difference with our free website and all of this other stuff you all are helping us to do in the process. So, okay, Alex, let's bring it home with our contributor spotlight. Let's start out, if you'll introduce yourself and talk a little bit about who you are outside of beer.
Sure. So my name is Alex Smith. I'm with ABS Commercial. We are a commercial brewing equipment manufacturer. We are also a little bit unique in that we operate a production brewery, a 20-barrel production brewery in Raleigh, North Carolina called Raleigh Brewing Company, as well as a homebrew shop, a cask supply shop. So we kind of have our fingers in a bunch of different wings of the craft beer industry. I serve as the sales and consultation manager for the whole company, so kind of just helping out everyone across the country. Outside of beer, got a newly grown family, so I've got two young boys. My wife and myself also have two dogs that keep us pretty busy, so taking up a lot of our time right now. Also do a lot of cycling, bike building, very much into fly fishing. Recently just moved back to North Carolina from Colorado, so navigating that transition on the fly fishing front, but having fun doing it. So
Excellent. Fly fishing sounds like you could do it everywhere, like both your places.
yeah, you just have to get creative.
Yes, creative is good. So specifically, what do you do with and for your clients, and what problems do you solve?
So our kind of big approach, because we operate a production brewery ourselves, is we really try and offer a 360-degree approach. So obviously our focus is, we design, build, and sell equipment. But because we operate a brewery ourselves, that's informed a lot of our decisions kind of in the entire process of the company. We also really try to work hand in hand with our customers in terms of giving them access. If they have questions about taproom management, we'll plug them in with our taproom manager. We're a woman-owned company, so our owner, Christy, she's been known to kind of open our books on the brewery side to breweries that are in planning, to show them, this is what we've done. And honestly, we've been in business for 10 years, and on the brewery side especially, we bootstrapped it a lot originally. And there's a lot of things that we did right. There's some things that we did wrong. So really sharing some of those successes and failures with our customers to help them avoid pitfalls is a really important thing for the company and for me in particular. I actually started with the company. I was the third employee and was the head brewer and production manager for the brewery originally. And so I was there for a lot of the kind of rough, days where we're figuring things out. And it is really one of my passions to help people avoid some of the struggles that I had to kind of learn to solve. So yeah, that's kind of our approach, is really we try to be more partners with our customers than, just an equipment vendor.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've said many times on here is the resources that you have in your vendors and their experience and their networking is pretty important. So we really have echoed that.
Yep. Yeah, we, again, we have the benefit in our brewery. We've partnered with companies like Pro Chiller and RMS Mills and that kind of stuff, and we use that all every day in our brewery, as well as all of our own equipment. So we really kind of stress test everything in house before we partner with someone, before we release a new design. So it really gives us kind of a unique, approach to that wing of the industry.
How did you first get involved in craft beer? What was your path that led you here?
Through wine, actually. So I went to the University of Georgia. I got a degree in sustainable agriculture. And as part of that, my freshman year, I got a wine grower's internship. Mm-hmm. So I worked on a winery for the summer after my freshman year on a North Georgia vineyard. And it was basically a lot of, pruning and tending to grapes, but it really kind of clued me into fermentation and, just that kind of scientific approach. I kind of came to find that I didn't have the patience nor the palate, at least at the time, for wine. So from there, kind of pivoted to beer, started to kind of bring a lot. And yeah, for a long time, worked in homebrew shops, kind of just worked in a bunch of different, in retail, worked at beer bars, that kind of thing, and then leapfrogged into production brewing, and now on the equipment side.
Interesting. Do you find that the equipment side is satisfying because you get to help solve problems for people across the board, or do you prefer doing it all and then living it?
Yes, I really like the equipment side. I've got pretty much my dream job, because I do get to now solve a lot of other people's problems rather than my own. So I do tend to sleep better at night. But I also do, at least up until this point, I've done almost all of our commissioning. So anytime we sell a brew house to a customer, as part of that package, I will actually fly out, spend a couple of days on site with them, brew their first batch of beer with them, make sure that they're comfortable with the equipment, make sure that they're set up for success. So really had this beautiful balance of not necessarily having to work in the brewery every single day, being able to help people and, across the country really become more successful and still get my hands dirty, and stay close to the systems and stay close to production. So it's been a really great balance.
Nice. So given all those different projects, what's the coolest one?
So the first one that came to my mind, and it's actually kind of pertinent because this connection was reforged at the last CBC in Nashville. I helped start out this brewery in Iowa, in Waukee, Iowa, called Kinship. A friend of mine, Zach Dobek, who I actually worked in restaurants with back in college, we bumped into each other on the floor at CBC, and it turned out that he had just moved to Iowa, his wife's family, and were getting ready to start a brewery in kind of the middle of nowhere in Iowa. So it was a very cool kind of connection, and he really had this grand vision. And they opened, I believe, 2 years ago now, with a very large, like 30-barrel brew house. Their slogan is Iowa's Lager Brewery. And they have really been kind of the seed in the community to really promote a lot of growth. There's so much development around where they are now. They've become super successful with just really cool, unique branding. I will admit there were moments where he told me where they were, and this vision that was like, are you sure you don't want a smaller system? But they're strapped. They're doing awesome, and so that's been one of the cool, just like the whole arc of it. And one of the things I'm really passionate within beer in these new breweries is doing them in ways that really drive community. They drive growth in the community. They kind of elevate the places around them. And that's where we're starting to see a lot of growth in general, is a lot of times in, smaller communities where people really don't have a lot of options for places to go to eat or drink, and having something local, something from the community is just always really cool to see.
Very nice. How about a complex or problematic project?
We try not to have too many problematic projects. I would say, in terms of complexity, one of my kind of pet projects right now is we're working to design, we're starting to see a lot of demand for smaller systems, and Dustin may be able to chime in on this, but basically people trying to open breweries, maybe in buildings that they shouldn't go. So trying to design a system that is a commercial ready system, but very close to plug and play, where all the venting is taken care of, all the steam connections, everything. So literally, the idea is, as long as you have a drain, you could put this in an office building if you wanted to. There's pretty much every step of the way, there's some pretty complex, engineering solutions. But again, that's kind of what we got into the business for, to solve problems, and we're starting to see customers with that need. So it's been really fun.
So the problem is often where you're putting the equipment, like the challenge.
Space constraints, or a lot of times it's the building, right? Location. The building's in the perfect spot, but it's a historic building, so we can't touch anything, or a lot of those kind of constraints. And again, since we're seeing a lot of growth, especially in smaller towns, they don't need a 30-barrel, brew house. They may only need a 5 or 7. And being able to be flexible, and again, taking a lot of the load off of, you don't need to hire as many contractors to run your steam piping, because that's already done. That kind of stuff, to try and take as much of the lift off of those new brewery owners as possible, because we're very well aware of how many kind of challenges they already have to navigate. So the more we can make the equipment side easier.
Sure. Okay, well, let's dive into your best practices or tips and tricks. And I'm excited that you're talking about growth in mind, like the future in mind, rather than just the right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, that's probably one of my biggest things, because the most common complaint we have is it almost doesn't matter what size system people get. They always wish they got something bigger. My number one thing would be bet on your success, you know. And with that, starting with a very clear concept in mind. And the biggest thing for us is like, how much beer do you want? At the very least, you know, you should have thought through the first 3 years, hopefully, of like, how much beer do you want to make? Do you need to make to, you know, support your business plan, and what's realistic? Because a lot of times we have people coming to us that say, I want a 10-barrel brew house, you know, X, Y, and Z. And when we ask them why, it's they either don't have an answer, or it's because, you know, the guy down the street did it that way and he seems to be successful. You know, that's not really a strong foundation. There's a very good chance that we could probably save you a lot of money if you come to the table with saying, you know, I want to make 500 barrels a year, 600, and then 800 in the first 3 years. Well, I can show you what a 5, 7, and 10 barrel system and supporting infrastructure looks like to meet that goal. To make sure that, again, we're not overselling you, we're not hamstringing you, we're kind of trying to hit that sweet spot of what actually fits your goals and your business model. So that's kind of my first point. Moving from that is, again, considering your location in the building. Another issue we've seen people run into in the past is, again, like, I'm on a 10-barrel system, but if they have short ceilings, they may not be able to fit a 20-barrel fermenter, but they can fit a 15-barrel fermenter. So in that instance, you know, getting a 7-barrel system might actually enable you to grow more. You'll have to do 2 turns in the brew house, but you can fit, you know, bigger fermenters essentially into your building, and that can definitely be a step forward. You know, so considering the building, ceiling heights, and then utilities are a big one too. So, you know, a lot of people will ask for an electric system, but they may not have nearly enough electric to even run a chiller. You know, so that's a good, okay, well, how much is it going to cost to run a new electric service? Do we need to start looking at another building, or do we need to start working on, you know, direct fire system instead of electric steam, that kind of thing? So really, yeah, taking a deep dive into what your building looks like, what kind of utilities you have on hand, is again going to help us navigate what your best choice is. So that would be the second one. 3, I would say, and this, there's a bit of a give and take here, because this is all budget dependent. When possible, I would say invest in savings. And when I say investing in savings, there are things that are a little bit more expensive upfront, but will end up saving you a lot of money down the line. One of the really key things to think about is labor, and especially in the current market where labor is just getting more and more expensive. And especially in our industry, finding skilled labor, I think we're coming to find that, you know, a talented, experienced brewer is worth, you know, a pretty good living wage, and you don't want to have them mopping floors for 2 hours. So, you know, when you're looking at your build out, put in some good drains so he doesn't have to mop as much or squeegee as much. Investing in something like a mill rather than buying pre-milled grain at, you know, an additional 7 cents. Some of that comes back to, like, our systems are designed to be very efficient. They're all hard piped and integrated. There's other systems in the market that are essentially scaled up homebrew systems. Yes, they will work, but if on our systems, I mean, you can be start to finish with a 6-hour brew day, and if a different system that's a little more cobbled together takes you 8 hours, you know, that's 2 hours of labor. We'll say, you know, $50 a day that you could be saving. So some of these things that are cheap up front end up becoming very expensive down the line. And again, I know that there's always a balance with that initial budget, but at least have an eye towards that. And we'll always kind of have that conversation of, okay, maybe you start with pre-milled grain, but this is what a mill and grain handling system is going to look like. So, once you're up and running and start making money, set aside some, and once you have the money to reinvest in that may be your next thing to consider. So let's see, so it's 3. Fourth one, again, is kind of really, we like people to plan for your success. Plan for what your max capacity is going to be. You don't really want to think about what am I going to kind of bootstrap today and tomorrow, but what is this, like when I'm successful in 3 years, am I kind of painting myself into it? So that's things like how you lay out your equipment. For instance, if we're talking about a 7-barrel, cellar layout, I would recommend people space their 7-barrel tanks so that they could be swapped with 15s if they need to be. If you kind of jam in all your 7 barrels, and then you kind of just don't leave yourself any room for growth. Same with running your glycol lines. Either put a cap with a valve so that you can, run them further, or better yet, run drops for additional fermenters, the day that you're running your initial glycol lines, and that again makes it easier to plug and play. We do our best to keep most common size cellar tanks in stock, and it's not uncommon for us to have customers, especially when spring and summer production picks up, like, hey, I need 220s like tomorrow, and we can do that. But if we are able to deliver those to you next day, but it takes you 2 weeks to shut down your entire cellar, replumb your glycol, put those in, that doesn't really have any benefit. So again, just kind of plan accordingly. There's always going to be a limit. There's going to be budget and space constraints, but within reason, think ahead. And then I would say the last thing for us is, in all realms of brewing, I feel like, is just really be flexible. I think a lot of people come into either, even from within the industry, coming into their own brewery, or from outside of the industry, with almost, you want to have a firm business plan in mind, but you also need to be able to understand your audience. You can do a lot of market research and, kind of think what the audience is going to want. But you may find, it's a completely different recipe than you thought that's successful. So we're able to design very custom equipment. However, 90% of our brew house sales are within a very similar design that can brew everything from, a 3% Berliner Weiss to a 10% Imperial Stout, and do lagers and, everything in between. The more you kind of make highly custom equipment, the harder it becomes. So, for instance, decoction systems that can really only do decoction brewing. You may find that people like the 5 lagers that you have on tap, but they also like, some of the other stuff that you're putting out. And if you inherently design your system where it adds 2 hours to every brew day, that's kind of, again, just painting yourself into a corner. So listening to your audience, making sure that you set yourself up for that flexibility. In our own experience at Raleigh Brewing Company, we opened 10 years ago. It's a very different, beer landscape. But we thought we were going to be an English style ale brewery. And very quickly, our #1 seller, which is, it still probably makes up 60% of our production, is a 9.2% Belgian Golden. I have no idea how or why. It's been like that for 10 years. I mean, that beer basically pays the bills. And it's not anything we ever expected, but we did have to kind of shift how we manage our cellar and how we manage that beer, and, invest in a centrifuge to be able to make that beer better. So yeah, just, understanding that you may need to be flexible. And again, I think we're all in this business to brew beer for our customers, make our customers happy. So it's important to keep in mind.
So what's the most common expansion that you see? You install the original system. Where are the places that people come back to you first and say, I want to add X?
Fermenters would be the first. Fermenters and or bright tanks. So a lot of people do just don't use bright tanks at all and just use unit tanks, which is very doable. We tend to see a little more loss on those systems. Again, you also have a little less flexibility. It is harder to do, a lager without a bright tank. It's doable, but you are going to tie that tank up longer, so you're going to see some production losses elsewhere. And ideally, I like to see about 4 fermenters per bright tank. But a lot of times with your brew house, and again, the way that we design our brew house is even the most simple brew house that we do, you can do a double batch on that system in about 10 hours. So it's either a fairly long day for one brewer, or better yet, we'll kind of overlap, where somebody comes in for 4 hours, somebody else comes in kind of on a swing, and then they finish up the day. So everyone's working an 8-hour shift. There's a little overlap in the middle, but you're doubling your production. So very rarely do we see, especially within the first couple of years, the brew house being the pinch point. A lot of times it's the cellar, it's more tanks to fill. We do tend to see some people asking about like adding a vessel to their brew house. In my mind, unless you're routinely brewing 3 or more times a day, that's usually not your pinch point. Again, it's where you can put the beer after you brewed it. So it's usually after a couple of years that we may consider like we'll add a separate whirlpool, but for the most part, it's.
Do you see a lot of people making different plans up front for canning or bottling or that kind of packaging pieces, or is that not so much connected to design in your equipment world?
It's definitely connected. We don't make any packaging equipment. And I will say, I think that's one of the big things that we saw as a result of COVID was pre-COVID, we saw a lot of people, wanting to do like 3 and 5 barrel brew houses, basically just be the neighborhood, pub. Absolutely opposed to canning or packaging anything. And then with COVID, where things were shut down, a lot of people had to scramble. Like, oh, okay, if we can't sell beer over the bar, how can we? And that kind of goes back to that flexibility point. You need to be nimble, and ideally, you have at least that potential in place, before it becomes an imperative. I wouldn't say that's for the smaller systems. It's usually not something people focus on from the get-go, but it does come to pass pretty quickly. We primarily work with CS Angelus and their CV lines. They're a little more expensive than the offerings from like Wild Goose and Twin Monkey, but we found their support and the quality of the equipment is excellent. That's what we use at our facility. So again, because we've tried to break it plenty in our own facility, and they've helped us out along the way. That's kind of who we typically recommend to people. But it's definitely an important consideration, and we always try to leave room for it when we're talking through designs with people.
Do you have when people are initially shopping for equipment, are there some things to look out for where some kinds of equipment might not work as well with glycol systems, or might not work as well with packaging, or might not work as well with, and so trying to save by basically cutting your nose off to spite your face just because you don't have all of the connections and efficiencies in terms of making the whole system work?
Yeah. I mean, stuff like sizing your chiller adequately is huge. You know, that's part of why we don't make mills, we don't make chillers, but we've worked with a lot of these vendors, and we know what models of theirs integrate seamlessly with ours. Sometimes people do piecemeal things together. They may save a little bit of money, but it ends up almost always being an expensive way to save money, because they run into issues and then we don't know what they have. So we can't support them because we don't know like what their glycol chiller is. Whereas if one of our customers has an issue with their glycol chiller, our glycol rep is someone I talk to on almost a daily basis. I can get them in touch with them, in a matter of minutes, versus if they're working with like a local chiller manufacturer or whatever, it impedes our ability to troubleshoot. It's not to say that we can't, but you can definitely run into issues there. One of the other things that we see is with used equipment. A lot of times it's a good deal, or it can be a good deal. All of our equipment, when you buy it from us, has a 5-year guarantee, a 5-year warranty. When you're buying used equipment, you lose the service from the original manufacturer. You also don't know how that equipment was treated. Stainless, Dana can talk to this, but stainless steel is stainless. It's not stain proof. It's not invincible. I've seen tanks that are, have been filled with RO and rotted out from the inside, and tanks with pinhole leaks all over the place. And not to, pigeonhole people, but a lot of times equipment that's used is often from, places that have gone out of business, may not have seen the TLC that that equipment kind of deserves and requires. So that's another, it's not that used equipment is not a good idea, but you definitely want to be careful, and if possible, have someone knowledgeable thoroughly inspect that equipment beforehand, before you. So,
Dana, you want to pitch in on that?
Yeah, it's exactly. I get a lot of calls like that about people that have bought, used equipment, and usually it's for a reason. Why the brewery went out of business, and they leave it. They just like it might have had beer, left in it, and so yeah, I totally agree with everything he just said. Buy new if you can.
Yeah. Well, to that point, Alex, have you had people contact you to say that they've purchased used ABS equipment? And can you help? Is there a way to have any sort of warranty at that point?
So yes, we have had people reach out. We aren't able to basically honor that warranty. We have had some conversations about essentially recertifying equipment. It's a very tricky space, because honestly, sometimes we know where that equipment came from, and we've kind of, gently, we know the history of that equipment, and that kind of comes back to why I spend time on site with all of our customers. Is you can kind of see from the get-go, I'll make recommendations of, you can't treat the equipment that way. You need to make sure you're following, this cleaning regimen. We're answering the phone calls about like, why is the tank doing this? We have all of that, logged in our notes on every customer. So we can kind of see problems from a long way away. I would say, in terms of supporting those customers, however, we do pretty much everything we can, because we do keep pretty diligent notes about all of the design drawings. But that's been an issue that we've seen is, we've had customers buy brew houses that have literally been like, the piping's been completely cut up and put back together. And they're seeing problems in welds that we didn't do. And they're asking us for, it's like, okay, well, yeah, we have the original signed design drawings, and it doesn't match at all, what they purchased. So again, and we've even worked with people, before a sale, which we're also happy to do. Hey, I'm looking at a brew house, this brew house. Can you take a look at it? I'll send you some pictures, or do you have any information on it? So they can at least do their due diligence. I mean, at the end of the day, sad ABS equipment doesn't help us or the customer at all. So we're always going to do what we can to support it. But unfortunately, without knowing, what it's been through, it's hard for us to do that for a secondary user.
Gotcha. Do you run into situations where people buy the equipment before they have a location and then they get a location that it doesn't really fit in?
Oh yeah. Yep. That happens often. We've had to do a lot of, modifications after the fact. I would say one of the other issues that we've seen, and this is why, what we call that kind of 360 approach, we start very early with people if possible. I mean, we help people with building selection and layout. We'll start talking with, I have one customer, I started talking to them 7 years before we delivered equipment. So it's never too early to start that conversation. And honestly, we can save you a lot of money the earlier you start talking to us and expensive mistakes. But we also will ask some of those pointed questions, again, about your building, but also your concept. Like, what kind of beers are you trying to make? Because we do have a standard, brew house design, but it's designed to make a wide range of beers. So we've had customers where, we've gone through this whole design process and we kind of get to the end and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm only brewing high gravity beers. It's like, well, we should have known that up front because we would have done some changes to the system, so we now make a point to like really ask all of these questions that I think we've found over the past 10 years. Sometimes people just don't think about, or assumptions are made, or what have you, because that's one of those, it's frustrating for us as the manufacturer and for you as the customer when it's like, we made this for you and it doesn't fit what you need. Like, so we found we kind of need to ask more questions up front, and some of them may make people feel like we're talking down to you, or like we don't think you're stupid. It's just we've seen so many things fall through the cracks in the past that we are really trying to do our due diligence to make you more successful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have two other things I can go to, but Dana, do you have anything? Dustin, do you have anything? Candace, that you think we should cover, questions that are always asked? Not Dana?
I'm good.
Dustin?
No, I don't think so. I think Alex covered it pretty good.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what are the different kinds of stainless, and how is stainless all the same? And I know the answer is no, but how do you evaluate that, and what are you looking for as better or not?
Yeah, so it isn't. The two main types that we deal with are 304 and 316. I'm sure Dana could get well into the weeds. I think I've actually sat through an entire speech that he's given on this very topic. But yeah, we work with those two. The kind of high level, points there is basically 316 is more chemical resistant. So for instance, we typically will use that, especially on the brew house, like the internal contact surfaces on brew houses where you're dealing with higher heat, higher corrosivity. A lot of the breweries that I've worked with in Texas use treated RO. We recommend no one ever put, just raw RO into a stainless vessel, period. That always needs to be treated in a poly tank. That's like some of the most corrosive stuff to any kind of stainless steel that we've ever seen. So yeah, some of the higher corrosivity areas will use 316. We do some work in like the pharma industry, kombucha breweries where they're dealing with a very acidic product. A lot of times we'll do 316 contact surfaces. we've done some very large like CIP skids for larger macro breweries, holding like concentrated chemicals. So that's typically all 316. Everything outside of that is typically standard 304, which is still, a very resistant form of stainless steel. We do have basically like a material reading gun, which is, I don't know how it works, but it's a laser that you shine on the tank and it tells you what it is, which is kind of neat. So we can, kind of verify that internally. You do need to be very careful if you're considering, buying direct from overseas, because we do see a lot of people get burned that way, where it'll be some sort of, it is technically stainless steel, but it may have a very high carbon content. I mean, I've seen some tanks kind of almost rust out from the inside because they may have mild steel supports welded inside a stainless shell. And where those connections are made, you basically contaminate the stainless with mild steel. So that more comes down to just, making sure you're dealing with a reputable vendor and that kind of thing. But we work with both of those. Again, if you're going to be working with RM, I always recommend going 316, especially everything.
So to take that a little further, because that's exactly where I wanted to go. Oh, go ahead, Dana. Insert.
Yeah, just real quick on the difference between 304 and 316. I gave a talk on this last week on the craft beer professionals on care and feeding of stainless steel. But the difference between 304 and 316 is really the 2 to 3% molybdenum. And that's what kind of gives it. And there's a little bit of phosphorus or silica in there too. So it's a harder, as Alex said, it's more corrosive resistant, but it's really important for people to passivate the equipment when they get it. And what I mean with that, John Palmer really is a big proponent of using citric acid to get the brake dust off. Get that iron out of there when you get it. Even though it comes from this country, it's shipped. There's brake dust on it. So really important to passivate your equipment before you put it in the service, whether it's 304 or 316.
100%.
And I think I remember, Dana, you've said you want to passivate regularly past that, right?
Yeah. And then I'm a proponent of the method of doing our acid first and then followed by an oxygenated non-caustic alkaline cleaner method. It lays down a conversion code, and that I think is more, because with calcium chloride that people are putting in beers, that's pretty hard on stainless. And if you're just relying on chromium oxide, it's not that protective. So the method that I like to promote, I think it gives you more protection against chlorides.
Gotcha. And Alex, are you able to get people started on the right regimen that way when you install and help people start their system? You said something about cleaning processes.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, our standing line is, refer to your chemical supplier, and we'll always work with your chemical supplier, because it's difficult for us. Again, as Dana can attest, every chemical supplier, has a caustic product. All of them are probably a little bit different. Same with, whatever chemical that they recommend for passivating. It could be citric, it could be nitric based, it could be, different blends, different concentrations. Some manufacturers recommend when you passivate it, you let it, you drain it, and then you let it air dry before you rinse. Some recommend you passivate, run the acid chemical, rinse immediately and let it air dry. So it's difficult for us when we don't know what chemicals you're using, but we'll always try and at least play middleman. And these are what you need to achieve to take care of this equipment. And you need to talk to your chemical supplier about how to achieve those goals, basically.
Gotcha. How about equipment selection? If you've got somebody who really is kind of starting at zero, how do you kind of dig through the different types and qualities of equipment that are available today? I know, especially with the pandemic and the shipping issues that have ensued, that there's definitely risk from ordering overseas. are there some kind of checklist items that you suggest people look at when they're shopping? Like, I know customer service is a big one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've definitely found it is difficult to compare apples to apples because everybody does quote equipment differently. So over time, we really like to, you know, as quickly as possible once we start talking to someone, is really hop on a call to like understand what their needs are and really explain what it is that we're offering and what variations, you know, different quotes that we see. Because we have seen, you know, some of our competitors, we will lay out all of our costs because we operate a brewery. We kind of operate on the assumption like we're selling you equipment that has the valves that you need to operate it, has the gauge, like, you know, it has all the fittings, it has the piping done. Whereas some manufacturers where it's like, this is the shell of the tank, and then it's $500 for the gauges, it's, you know, $400 for the valve. So they'll come to us and be like, well, you know, their tanks are $1,000 less. It's like, well, if they're fully outfitted, they're $300 more, you know, and it's just really, unfortunately, you do have to have kind of a keen eye for that. As you mentioned with shipping, the other big item is making sure you understand what is included. So through the pandemic, we actually ended up absorbing, before the pandemic, all shipping, you know, all ocean freight, everything was built into the cost of our equipment. As those costs went up, we tried to maintain that as long as possible. And we ended up absorbing basically $1.3 million in shipping costs that we did not pass on to our customers. We did eventually have to start entering like a line item that's basically, you know, per foot in the container, this equipment takes up, there's this amount, you know, added onto that, but that's included in your quote. So we've had some customers in the past, I think most people have kind of somewhat balanced this out at this point, but yeah, we've had customers go with a competitor and then their equipment is delivered to the competitor's warehouse and like, okay, now you owe us $40,000 for ocean freight that wasn't really disclosed up front before you can receive the equipment. So really, yeah, going through with a fine tooth comb, making sure you understand what is included, what isn't included. Even stuff like my service visit, you know, with our brew houses, one of our engineers will come out for a couple days, help you set up, you know, the control panel, all that stuff, and then I'll come out for a couple days, or one of our reps will come out to help you brew. That's included, you know, in our quotes. Sometimes, you know, other people will charge that as a premium. So it's really just a matter of understanding what you're getting and comparing apples to apples. And we're always, I mean, unfortunately, I think it usually requires kind of an in-depth conversation, which is why we usually encourage people to do that sooner than later, just so you at least know what to look for.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Would it be fair to say that most equipment that is assembled or fabricated in the US, most or some of the parts and pieces are probably still coming from overseas, but that's the manufacturer's problem in the US to figure that out?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it really, everyone does it differently. I mean, I think a lot, I can't speak to all manufacturers, but at the very least, a lot of stainless steel is coming from China. And I think it's another thing to kind of touch on is there is a bit of a stigma towards, you know, I think things coming from China. And at the end of the day, it's just like everywhere else. There's, you know, subpar stuff being made in every country. There's also excellent manufacturing done in all of those countries as well. So I've seen some American-made equipment that had some of the worst welds that I've ever seen, and I've seen Chinese equipment that's, you know, been very poorly made as well. I've also seen Chinese equipment that rivals German-made equipment. So that's another thing, you can't just paint with a single brush. As you vet, you know, manufacturers, ask them if they have, other customers in your area that, either they'll take you to, or that they can put you in touch with. Like, you want to lay eyes on equipment, regardless, because that's, it's very important. Words are just words. And you can't just kind of paint with a broad brush. You've got to look at it in person. So, which is another, good reason to come to CBC.
There you go. How about replacement parts and additional parts or that kind of thing? Service obviously is, but do you run into, are there some manufacturers that you may get a great system, but then you can't get any replacement parts, so you can't get any additional parts, you can't, and people come to you for the parts?
Oh yeah, that happens all the time. One of the big things, one of kind of the differentiators for us is that we work with a dedicated manufacturing facility. We've been working with them exclusively since we started this company, which means, one of the big ones is like valve seats, for instance. If you manufacturers that will they may work with 3 or 4 manufacturers, depending on who's cheaper at the time. Even if the quality is fairly even across the board, they're likely, sourcing valves from different factories or gauges from different factories and that kind of thing. So yeah, you'll end up in a situation where, all you need is a $5 gasket, but you have to buy an entirely new valve because you can't source that. Same with manuals. That's another common one, where if people are changing that spec, and it could be something like to the eye, you don't even notice it, but it is eventually going to kind of bite you, because a couple millimeters here and there is really important in the gasket. So that's definitely something important to keep in mind. We keep a very heavy stock of everything at our Raleigh warehouse of all consumables, because when stuff like that does go down, you need it in a day or two, not a couple weeks. If you have a pump that isn't working properly, that can shut down your operation until you're able to get it fixed. And it could be the difference between $100, seal set or a $4,000 pump. So.
Right. Very cool. Well, we should probably wrap up. So what would you say in terms of contacting you? What's the best way to reach you, and kind of at what stage? I think you've said as early as possible. At what stage should people reach out for equipment?
Yeah, I mean, it's never too early. Again, for us, our MO is we really want to be partners with you in this project and set you up for success. I have had people be like, oh, well, I didn't want to bother you because I'm this far out. That's not how we operate. It is never too early. We're excited as you are about what's on the horizon. So let us know. We want to, be a resource for you. As far as contacting us, our website is just abs-commercial.com. That's also where all of our small parts are available. My email is just alex@abs-commercial.com. We do have a contact us link on there, sales@abs-commercial.com. It's kind of the generic email address, so that works too. We're going to be in booth 801 at CBC as well. So we're actually pairing with Arrived. So look for purple and red on the show floor there. So those are kind of probably the easiest ways to get in touch with us. But we have, Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff too.
Awesome. That sounds good. All of these videos will live forever. So we're talking about CBC 2023. If there's anybody that's watching this in the future and wants to know where we are, this is for 2023. So thank you, Alex. Thank you for joining us today and going through all of that stuff. As he mentioned, all of us will be at CBC, and Started Brewery has a lounge right outside of the expo floor. So when your feet hurt, come join us. Coming up, I won't go through the whole litany of all the things that I did at the beginning, but make sure to check out the podcast. We have an upcoming equipment podcast here in the very near future, and just, had the ownership podcast land yesterday, and we've got kitchens and tap rooms and brew pubs and production brewery pros and cons coming up before CBC as well. So join us for that. Join us next month for our resource group with Carrie Shumway. We're going to go from equipment to finance and numbers and accounting and all the things that Carrie does. And then with Charlie Gotten-Kinney to talk about developing a sales plan with our quarterly educational webinar. Thank you, Dana, for coming. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Candace, Alex. Much appreciation, and we'll see you in Nashville.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.